True crimers, welcome to Break the Case. I'm your host. I'm Jen Coffindaffer. Listen, I had to pop in here regarding the ruling today by Judge Hippler. This relates to the Idaho 4 case, the brutal slaying murders with a K-bar knife of Maddie Mogan, Ethan Chapin, Kaylee Gonzalez, and Xana Kernodle. This non-dissemination order that was put in place very early on in the case has now been officially eliminated. Judge Hippler said, listen, this particular ruling to basically put a gag on the individuals involved with the case from them discussing out of court information had to come to an end. Why? Very simply, gag orders, non-dissemination orders by another name are actually put into place to protect the accused, to make sure that information isn't out there in the public and really look out for the rights of that individual who's being prosecuted. Specifically, they don't want jury pools being tainted. They don't want public perception being tainted. And so they put these very tight restrictions on cases, particularly high profile cases like the Idaho 4 case. So what happened today? Essentially today, the different media groups, including all the majors, certainly News Nation and many others came together in a consortium, if you will, and said, listen, we want this information disseminated. The trial is not going to happen. There's been a plea of guilty. Why in the world are we keeping all of this information under wraps? This is a First Amendment. This is a right for the public to know as well this information. So Judge Hippler considered it. And for the reasons I just stated, he said, you know what, you're right. We're going to cease and desist with the gag order. Now, this is the catch. This is really important. This doesn't mean that all of a sudden we're going to get this deluge of evidence from the Idaho 4 case. You can count on that not happening. What you can count on is, as he said, he is going to be reflecting on each piece of evidence and deciding what will be disseminated, what won't, what will stay under wraps. And specifically, he even talked about the evidence that has already been sequestered and I don't think will ever be released. We call that sealed evidence. So what he said he's going to do is look at it in reverse order. So he's not going to start from the inception of this case. My gosh, it's been almost 3 years. He's going to go in reverse. So he's going to look at everything he said he's familiar with first and get that out as he can. So what can we expect to see? We can certainly expect to see information related to search warrants, related to Amazon, related to Google, all the media information I think we are going to see. We're going to see a lot of interviews, I believe, although some could be redacted. What you're not going to see, and I would argue ever, except for if there's a leak, and I think there will be a leak. There's already been leaks, even with the gag order. What I think you will never see, at least purposefully released by Judge Hippler, are anything to do with the autopsy photos. I don't think we are going to see information related to Ann Taylor's false assertions that 4 other people murdered Brian Kohberger. I talked about that a little bit in a tweet. I mean, for me, and we saw it in the Karen Reed case, it's a personal affront. I think it's crossing the line of providing a defendant with rigorous and thoughtful and passionate counsel when you start falsely accusing others. I just, for me, that crosses the line. I put a tweet out. I said, what do you guys think? Is that crossing the line? Everybody deserves to have a great defense. Everybody deserves, I think, more than anything else, to make sure that their constitutional rights are not infringed upon. That's really the biggest thing that must be always secured. But when it comes to actually pointing the finger that somebody else did a crime that your client did, have an issue with that. Now, a lot of people might argue, well, Ann Taylor might not have known Brian Koberger did this. I have a very difficult time believing that, based on all the evidence, based on her emotions alone and things she said. And remember, she fervently said that her client not was not only not guilty, but was innocent of these horrible and horrific murders. And then she went on to point the finger at 4 people. So, not to digress, but those names will likely always be under seal, meaning sealed by the court. They're not allowed to be released. But just think how many people know those names. Everyone and anyone on that defense team, everyone and anyone on the prosecution team, many people in law enforcement that are supporting the prosecution team. So many people, the clerical staff, the court staff, so many people. And you know what? I think it was Mark Twain that said, you can definitely keep a secret if 2 people know if 1 person is dead. I think these secrets, especially one this big, is going to be really hard to keep under wraps. So having said that, certainly he'll keep those names sealed, and also all that 23andMe, any databases that were utilized for DNA that dialed down on Brian Koberger, other than the strategies used to obtain the DNA and things like that that will be released, we're not going to see all the people that they filtered through to get to Brian Koberger. I do not believe. But remember, this is terabytes and terabytes of information. It's going to take so long for the judge to review it, quite frankly, that I don't know when we will really be seeing anything and everything. I think we will see piecemeal come in. Certainly, he will probably have his law clerks working on it in some sort of fashion and release batches, I think is his exact verbiage in terms of releasing. So we are going to know some information. I think we will know about the interviews, some of the information from those interviews conducted. Remember, somebody like Bethany Funk and Dylan Mortensen, the 2 surviving roommates, would have been interviewed multiple times. Will some of that be released? I think probably. How about all the interviews of the neighborhoods, both in Pennsylvania and in Pullman and in Moscow? All of those interviews are going to be certainly likely, at least in the most part, disseminated. There's just going to be so much that comes out. This is going to go on forever. But remember, Judge Hippler said to me said something that to me, I literally was, watching and going through everything, and I just was taken aback. And I'm sure many of you caught this. And for those of you who haven't listened or been able to go through the exact verbiage and the quotes from that hearing, it's jaw-dropping. And this is what's jaw-dropping is, remember, this plea deal included the fact that it would not be able to be appealed. Okay? Not appealed. But there's a little case called Idaho versus Garza. Actually, I think it's Garza versus Idaho that went all the way to the Supreme Court. And that case basically said it's a guy who waived his rights on 2 cases. One was an assault case, I believe. The other was a drug case. And he basically said, listen, I waived my rights, but I had ineffective assistance of counsel, and he had all these reasons, and they were denied at the state level. Again, went up to the Supreme Court level, and Judge Hippler actually cited that case and said, the appeal situation is not over, basically. And I tell you, I've talked ad nauseum about the Menendez case, the fact that the Menendez brothers were sentenced to life without the possibility of parole. They have been resentenced to 50 years with the possibility of parole. And now, actually, they're pushing to have uh, their convictions vacated, literally overturned. I mean, that is where we're at right now, because as time goes by, exactly what happened to those victims, the horrificness of the crime, the pre-calculation that was involved, all the real facts of that crime get forgotten. They get forgotten in the Menendez case because all of a sudden there's a typed written letter that was supposedly found in somebody's drawer. It's not even been authenticated. It can't be authenticated. It was never brought up before at trial. And then you have, of course, everything that came out in the first trial about them being abused, yet you don't have corroboration of that. And yet it is being used and was used, I think, at least in part, to overturn that sentence and to really get social media, mainstream media, and attention on it. And then a groundswell of Hollywood types and others to support this. And now understand, and I understand, that Brian Koberger's plea is a plea. That was not the situation with the Menendez brothers. They went through the trial adjudication. But nevertheless, with this Garza case that Hippler mentioned, it seems that at least the door is cracked open for an appellate situation. Secondarily, I always talk about Leslie Van Houten, one of the Charlie Manson killers. Everybody says, but Jen, nobody pregnant was murdered. Well, in this case, of course, nobody pregnant was murdered, meaning the Idaho 4 case, but they were just talking about egregiousness. What is more egregious than what happened to Xana, Ethan, Maddie, and Kaylee? I mean, in their sleep, in their beds, Xana was up, but I mean, horrible. In the Manson cases, Sharon Tate was 8.5 months pregnant and was viciously knifed to death. That's the same type of correlation I'm making. The Manson murders were as vicious, I believe, as we will find that the Idaho 4 murders were. Equally horribly vicious. Leslie Van Houten personally said she stabbed, I think the exact numbers are between 14 and 16 times, Rosemary LaBianca. This was not just standing there or having no role or driving the car. This was viciously stabbing. Do that 14, 16 times. This is, and then they sat around, by the way, in that house, as I recall, and ate and, smeared stuff on the walls and everything else. This was brutal. And everybody back then said, there is no way these people should get anything but the death penalty. And you know what? They got that death penalty. And then you know what? They rescinded the death penalty in California. And then you know what? Well, they got life in prison. But you know what? Leslie Van Houten is out smelling roses because she's found not to be a danger to society. What does this have to do with being a danger to society? To me, this has, in other words, I don't know whether she's rehabilitated or not. She's an older person now. Maybe she's rehabilitated. I don't know. But this has to do with a punishment. This has to do with the LaBiancas, the Tates, the Folgers that had their loved ones viciously stabbed. And this is what I've been saying all along. Not maybe when you and I are even alive, or I can speak for myself, maybe not when I'm alive. But 20 years from now, 30 years from now, and everybody said, oh, Jennifer, nobody will forget this. They forget. I have watched it over and over and over again in cases. And people forget, even in the most egregious of cases, even blowing your father's head off from the back, blowing your mother's face off from the front as she crawled like a cat to try to avoid you. Yeah, the, people forget. And whenever you leave that door open, things can happen. And Hitler talked about it. But again, I'm digressing because I was so irritated to hear about that. And I started reading up on the case, and I need to read about it more. I have not read. Sotomayor had the major opinion, and then there's several dissenting opinions. I have not read up on that like I need to, but Judge Hitler certainly mentioned it. So it's relevant in this case, and it's concerning. But aside from that, that has to be considered too when you talk about dissemination. I mean, what does it mean if somebody can appeal? If somebody can appeal, that means that appeal could win. It means the appeal could win. I keep saying this about Scott Peterson. They're appealing fervently about that case. I mean, they want that case overturned. They're looking at DNA that were two, robbers that had a van down the road that, they found on a bed some DNA. I mean, that is how far, and thankfully the judge denied a lot of, of this wild goose chase in Peterson case, but still it's going down the road. Scott Peterson, she was pregnant. The baby, Connor. I'm just saying, all these people that I just named, these examples, I understand for all the attorneys in the audience, I understand those were adjudicated cases through trial. I understand that this is a plea agreement, but I also am learning more and more about Garza. And anytime you have a chance at an appeal, that means you have a chance to win that appeal. And I tell you, listen, I wrote something about this. I wrote, what would happen if one day your daughter came in, and I have a daughter the exact same age of Kaylee when she was murdered. What happened? And I've always said this, Maddie and Kaylee, for those of you who've seen pictures of my daughter, they favor very much. If my daughter said she wanted to go back to her alma mater, to see her friends, to enjoy a football game, show off her new, Range Rover, and she called me as she does every day and said that, I'd be like, oh my gosh, have a great time. And then if my next phone call is, your daughter is dead, and then my next phone calls and my next intersections with a coroner and with police and with a prosecutor reveal the heinousness with which my beautiful 21-year-old daughter was massacred. And then subsequently, over years, I have no idea the evidence and exactly what's going on in a case. And then as I'm all prepared to go to trial, I have $50,000, $60,000 raised to house myself and my family so I can go to trial. Then I find out of the blue on a Friday that there are discussions of a plea, and then it's signed, sealed, and delivered on the 1st, right after I've been notified right at the end of a weekend. Trust me, that was no mistake that they were notified on a Friday night. I mean, every time I think about this, it infuriates me, because although many of the victim parents and families, including all the other families for the most part, not the aunt of Xana, and certainly not the Gonzalez family, but even they were shocked. And then once it all really, settled in with them, they accepted it, and ultimately, I think they realized to go through a trial. Certainly for the surviving roommates, how horrible that would have been. Certainly from a money standpoint, I am going to do a post on the money spent by both the prosecution and the defense on this because of the prolonged nature of the defense filings and the prolonged nature of this whole thing. Thank goodness Judge Hippler stepped in and got it under control. Or this could have gone on for years like Lori Vallow did. But my point is, now you get these calls that the death penalty that you feel was deserved, you thought it was on the table, it's just such a blindside. And I understand it. I'm sure many of you do too. So anyway, the bottom line is, when I heard that today, the Garza case, and then looked at it, I was worried. I'm still worried. And I'm also worried about 20 years from now, 30 years from now, 40 years from now. He's a young person. He'll still be alive. Will he ever get out like Leslie Van Houten? Might not be a danger to the community, but would he have been rightly punished? Some people come on my Twitter and they say, Jennifer, this shouldn't be about revenge. Jennifer, wanting the death penalty for Brian Kohberger, that sounds like you want revenge. I don't want revenge. It should be the punishment. It's just about a punishment. And I'm not even for the death penalty in a broad stroke. I'm very much for the death penalty when it involves children and when it involves mass and serial killings. That's where I've drawn the line for the most part. There could also be maybe some other just totally egregious ones that case by case. But overall, I'm not for the death penalty. You go into a bank and you rob them and you shoot the person. I mean, that person is still dead and it's horrible and everything. But I do think, at least from my vantage, you have to have these really atrocious circumstances that accompany the murder before, at least for me, that I see that a death penalty would be justified. After we get off, and I'm going to get off quick, I really just wanted to get on to address this because I saw a lot of questions. I just want to see if there's any questions on here. Let's see. Particularly, no, I don't see any others. I think I addressed all the ones that I saw asked during Twitter after I posted some of these reflections from the hearing today. I just wanted to get on and say, I hope everybody continues to, of course, support the families. I hope everybody continues to talk about this case. It seems like there's going to be some appellate right. I really wish that would be more discussed. I might even put together a panel and see if we can get some lawyers to discuss this. But man, when I saw that, and I wrote this probably a little too passionately, I'm like, Kohberger's playing us all. He knows all about Garza. I didn't know about Garza. And it's an Idaho case. I didn't know about Garza until Judge Hippler talked about it today. So, I mean, I was always concerned because I just see what happens. I see what happens. I see people getting behind other people, murderers, and aggrandizing them and finding this weird, bizarre niche, kind of the same people that I think write the love letters and want to marry them and all of this. I think it's that same sort of weird niche. I'm sorry if I offend anybody, but I think it's just nutty. Spicy cough today. But anyway, I'm going to get off. Don't want to repeat myself in any way. let's keep praying for those families. There's a big sentencing coming up. I believe the Chapins will not be there. I don't know if any of the Gonzalez family will be there. I think Steve said he was not going to be there. I just posted a day on Xana's mom. And so I hope you can take a look at that. Her reflections. I tell you, it's such a different interview from when Ashley Banfield interviewed her. I believe it was December of 2022, and then again in January of 2023, if I remember correctly. And if you see her today, she looks so great. She's found a religious stronghold. I said in a tweet, listen, there's no one I respect more than addicts that find their way, that overcome that addiction. I have a stepsister who went through it and actually still struggles with it every day to keep her sobriety. I have really who was my absolute best friend that I pulled out of their home. She left behind her 4 kids. She left behind her husband. My husband was so amazing and agreed to let her move in with us. And she moved in with us for several months. And we went through, we kid around, I call it Camp Coffin Daffer, got her detoxed and got her sober. And I learned so much during that, going to actually AA meetings with her until they kicked me out because they said you're not an alcoholic, and we had to give her a sponsor. You can go to Al-Anon, but you can't. There's a certain point at which if you're not an alcoholic or an addict in some way, you can't really, there's no way for me to have understood everything she was going through and her struggles. But so I've been very close and tangled with things like this. I just mentioned this because please look on my Twitter. Xana Kernodle's mom, Kara Northington, I believe his last name. Wow, she has really changed and really is in a good place right now. And man, does she look, I can see Xana in her now, where I never could before. So she's got a long road to hoe, and it's a never ending issue, certainly for an addict. But I just wanted to call your attention to that for those wondering what's going on the Xana Kernodle front. Because nobody really talks much about her family. Her aunt came out and, of course, was vehemently opposed to the death penalty arrangement. But catch that, Matty Mogan's father, he says it's giving him, sort of a sense of closure. And so that's good. At the end of the day, it's really, to me, about what these victim families think. But I'm worried. I'm worried until all the appellates are done. And to my point about this non-dissemination, there's a lot that could be held back pending the closure of the appellate process. So keep that in mind when you're wondering where all this information is. It might take quite a long time, years even, to trickle out. All right, till next time, everybody. Thank you. Jumped on quick. May justice be served for the Idaho 4.